The US government owes $37 trillion. To put that in perspective, $1 trillion is a quarter of the way to the moon. $4 trillion stacked on top of each other is an entire trip to the moon. The US government owes 9 trips to the moon in dollars stacked on top of each other. That's unfathomable. And what's crazy is that those trillions of dollars, they're not even being used properly for you, the taxpayer, who are the ones that are giving it to the government. The majority of the money that you, the taxpayer, is paying the government is just going to pay interest on the debt. And so the US, Trump, and the executive team have tried to come up with new creative ways to solve this debt issue, because it's not going to get solved by paying it. It's not like when you have a $1,000 Visa bill after Christmas and you just pay it to zero. The US government is in so much debt that it's likely never going to be able to pay it off. And so now they've put on their creative thinking hats and they're trying to figure out new ways of solving this issue. But they're not doing it through fiat currency. They're doing it through gold and through crypto. And that's alarming, because if Trump and his team push a new type of currency, especially in the digital space, this is going to change money forever. It'll reset the debt cycles, it'll reset all of your asset prices, and it'll reset your savings account. This will be so big and it'll transfer wealth throughout generations to come. But let's break that down into simpler ways that we can fully understand and explain to our grandma when we're sitting at Thanksgiving dinner. Here's the simple version. The government collects tax dollars from people like you and I. They spend that money on military, on healthcare, on welfare, and on infrastructure. But here's the issue. Their spending habits are as bad as your wife's. They're spending way more than they actually bring in. It is projected that this year in 2025, the government's going to spend almost $7 trillion and only bring in $5 trillion. That's a $2 trillion surplus that they're going to add to the national debt, taking the debt from $37 trillion to almost $40 trillion. That's going to bring it to an additional trip between the Earth and the moon. Because you know what? It's just like your credit card bills. The bigger the balance, the more interest you pay, the harder it is to pay back. But here's another big kicker. The Fed and Jerome Powell are refusing to cut rates and give us neutral pricing. They're holding rates up, which is making that balance even bigger and creating a bigger discrepancy between the tax dollars brought in and the tax dollars paid out. So you got to ask yourself, what is funding this? Well, it's not magic and it's not Amex. It's the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is going to just print more cash. And while it doesn't feel like it's hurting you in any way because they're not taxing your paycheck directly, they are taxing you through inflation. You see, every time the Federal Reserve prints money, it devalues the dollar that's in your pocket.
What's in your wallet?
And this has created a giant cycle that we're now stuck in. And so here's what happens. The Federal Reserve prints more money. It devalues the dollar. And now the price of eggs at Costco jumps from $3 to $12 a dozen. It's an endless cycle that the greedy people at the top have put us in. But at least it's not Joe Biden's auto pen. Trump is actually trying to do something about it. And here are the 3 big ideas that are floating around. Number 1, gold revaluation. Number 2, a Bitcoin reserve. And number 3, the Genius Act. So let's take a moment and break down each one. First up, gold. The US is sitting on about 261 million ounces of pure gold. But on the books, it's only valued at about $42 an ounce. What that math breaks down to, the government only lists about $11 billion worth of gold. That's nothing compared to the trillions of dollars that we have in debt. But gold today, it trades closer to $3,300 an ounce. If the US reevaluated that same gold that we have in our reserve, that'd be about $860 billion. That's an instant account trick that can add about $849 billion just out of thin air. And here's how it works. The government doesn't even sell the gold. They just hand the Fed a certificate that says this gold is now worth $860 billion. Like, here you go. In exchange, the Fed gives them $800 billion in cash that they could spend. No loan, no debt, just money backed by gold, just like it used to be. Because that's how it happened. Back in 1934, FDR revalued gold from $20 an ounce to $35 an ounce after the Great Depression. It gave the government billions of dollars in new spending and the power to restart the economy. Could it work again? I don't know. But if gold prices fall, the balance sheet gets smaller and the government looks a lot weaker. So let's move on to a more modern way of solving this problem, which I think is actually going to happen: the Bitcoin reserve. In March of 2025, Trump shocked the world when he created a Bitcoin reserve strategy. And no, the US isn't out there buying Bitcoin on Robinhood and Coinbase. Instead, what they're doing is so brilliant. They're stealing it from criminals. All the Bitcoin and crypto that they're seizing from criminals, from El Chapo, from El Mayo, and all of the other Sinaloa cartel bosses, they're adding it to their cold wallets. And so depending on who you ask, the government has seized anywhere from 30,000 to 200,000 Bitcoins. At $100,000 a coin, that could be valued anywhere from $3 billion to $20 billion. And just like with gold, they could pledge that Bitcoin to the Fed, revalue it higher, and create dollars without adding more debt. And here's why it matters. In the past, the US sold off all the Bitcoin that they were stealing from the criminals, but they sold it too early and they missed out on the upswing of Bitcoin, missing out on almost $17 billion. By holding instead of selling, they're betting on the Bitcoin's long-term value and using that value to strengthen its balance sheet again. But here's the thing: if Bitcoin crashes, the Fed's IOUs are going to look a lot weaker and a lot less valuable. There's even some ideas that the government can actually sell off all of its gold and put all of that money into Bitcoin. Simultaneously, that'll do two things. It'll devalue gold across the entire world, completely crippling economies like China and Russia, who are so closely tied to gold reserves, and making the US just that much stronger, because they're going to drive up the cost of Bitcoin or whatever cryptocurrency they decide to use. It's a play that's not likely, but it's a play that could checkmate other economies and globally change the way money is transacted forever. But here's the third: the Genius Act. This one's absolutely bonkers. Trump signed this in 2025 to regulate stablecoins. But it does more than that. It allows the US to create stablecoins pegged to gold or Bitcoin that can circulate as alternatives to US dollars. Think about this: a US-backed crypto coin tied directly to assets instead of just money getting printed out of thin air. That could expand the money supply without raising debt. It's bold, but it raises a ton of questions. What would happen if the asset that it's backing all of a sudden collapses, gold drops to all-time lows, or Bitcoin completely crashes? Then we're really in trouble, and the US dollar might lose its global power. So here's the biggest risk with all of this. While all three could present some temporary solutions, they're all still tied to other entities. Bitcoin could crash, gold could crash, stablecoins could crash. And the US dollar is under attack, and slowly but surely it's starting to lose its position as the world currency. If the dollar loses its position as a world reserve currency, it's going to be because people lost trust in it. You see, it wasn't too long ago that Nixon just decided, hey, we're going to get rid of the gold standard. In 1971, Nixon decided that he wasn't going to pay back the French the gold that they were holding. You see, the French had bought a bunch of dollars, thinking that one day they could turn those dollars back in and get their gold. And when they went back to the treasury and they said, hey, we want the gold, Nixon realized that this could be a potentially huge problem if all of these countries came to the US and turned in their dollars for the gold that was supposed to be on hand.
Well, I'm not a crook.
It was at that moment that he got rid of the gold standard. Getting rid of the gold standard gave the Treasury the ability to print money and use inflationary tactics to pay off debt and make their debt worth less over time. And it's unfortunate because what had become a temporary solution has now become standard practice. You see, it's hard for the government to issue out new regulation that's going to just implement a new tax. Could you imagine you get your pay stub and on there it says US deficit tax, and every month you're having to pay an extra $100, $200, $500 to pay off the debt that the US has incurred because the government can't get itself together and become efficient enough? It would completely crumble civilization. People would fight back. It'd be like the Boston Tea Party all over again. So they do it secretly. They do it through inflation. Inflation is just a tax on the American public. And how do they cause inflation? They print more money. 4 out of every $10 have been printed since 2020. And that's why asset prices have had the biggest rise in the last 4 years that we've probably seen, at least in my lifetime and probably in America's lifetime. It doesn't seem like it's a direct cost to you because you're not seeing it on your pay stub, but you're probably seeing it when you go to the grocery store. And so while I'm not a financial planner and I can't tell you what to do because that's not my job, I can tell you how to get a mortgage. For the regular folks like myself, I can tell you what I do to protect myself against potential government-caused inflation is I just diversify my portfolio. I have assets in crypto, in the stock market, I have houses. That's the only way that you can protect yourself. And I know when the average American can't save $1,000 for an emergency, you're probably thinking like, how? That's damn near impossible. But it seems like more and more the separation between the bourgeoisie and the proletarians is growing. And so unless the proletarians are going to fight back, unless the rest of us are going to call out the government for making all of us broke, then there probably is never going to be any changes. But at the very least, we can start to see President Trump and his team start to fight for the common folk and start to at least get creative with the revaluation of gold, with the development of a government-backed stablecoin, with holding Bitcoin in assets. The government is starting to think like a business, and hopefully one day we can get rid of some of this national debt and it doesn't get passed down to our grandchildren. But you gotta let me know what you think in the comments. Are we doomed for failure? Or are we gonna be able to fight out of this because we're America, the greatest country on earth and the greatest experiment that's ever succeeded?
Our allies. Now, none of this is the fault of a 20-year-old college student, but you nonetheless are, without a doubt, a member of the worst generation ever. So when you ask what makes us the greatest country in the world, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Yosemite? Sure used to be. We stood up for what was right. We fought for moral reasons. We passed laws, struck down laws for moral reasons. We waged wars on poverty, not poor people. We sacrificed, we cared about our neighbors, we put our money where our mouths were, and we never beat our chest. We built great big things, made ungodly technological advances, explored the universe, cured diseases, and we cultivated the world's greatest artists and the world's greatest economy. We reached for the stars, acted like men. We aspired to intelligence. We didn't belittle it. It didn't make us feel inferior. We didn't identify ourselves by who we voted for in the last election, and we didn't scare so easy. We were able to be all these things and do all these things because we were informed by great men, men who were revered. First step in solving any problem is recognizing there is one.
If you want more videos like this where we break down financial topics, whether it's through real estate or crypto, make sure you comment, like, and subscribe because our channel is just getting started.